What's going on, AP peeps? We have a video of chapter 13. We're going to cover about 15 years worth of U.S. history, so let's get started. We're going to start with the corrupt bargain of 1824, the election of 1824. It's often called the corrupt bargain because of what happens. 4 people are running for president: Andrew Jackson, John Adams, Henry Clay, and George Crawford. None of the 4 win a majority of electoral votes, so this goes to the House of Representatives. Notice here in orange, this is Henry Clay. He wins Missouri, Kentucky, and Ohio. Please write down Henry Clay wins Ohio. Under the 12th Amendment, it says that the House must vote on the top 3. Sadly, Henry Clay is out. Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House. He likes Adams over Andrew Jackson, so he throws his support behind Adams. Adams becomes the 6th President of the United States. A few days later, he appoints Henry Clay Secretary of State, and Jackson, majority of the popular vote, he and his supporters are furious. They cry that there was this corrupt bargain made between the two of them. Flash forward 4 years to 1824. Andrew Jackson is president. Old Hickory is his nickname. He was seen as a common man. He was from the West. He was a very strong nationalist and unionist. And as you'll see, he believes in the power of the federal government over states. And there's a couple things he does that increases the federal government's power. He believed in the spoils system, which was giving government jobs to political supporters. So if you actively campaigned for him, if you supported him, you would get a job from him. He would appoint you. He defended this by saying, hey, you know what? The government, if it's truly by the people, run by the people, then I should be able to appoint people. So in 1828, we have something called the Tariff of Abominations. This is so important. It's also the Tariff of 1828. This promoted sectional differences, North versus South. South Carolina hated it. Remember, South and West hate tariffs because prices of goods increase. They hurt consumers. South Carolina, John C. Calhoun, who is the sitting vice president, he writes something called the South Carolina Exposition. In this, he argues that states should be able to nullify the tariff. And one place he gets these ideas from or draws them from is the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions written by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. Remember, they were written in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts and said that states had the power to nullify federal law. John C. Calhoun takes these ideas and uses the same argument in the South Carolina Exposition. Please write down the South Carolina Exposition. We have nullies in South Carolina. These are people who want to nullify this law. The Tariff of 1832, 4 years later, it is passed. It reduces the tariff amount, but still high enough that South Carolina is upset. So they're taking it a step further. They're going to again say we have to nullify this tariff. And there's John C. Calhoun. Wow, not a good-looking guy at all. To take it a step further, John C. Calhoun in the South Carolina legislature says, you know what, if the federal government tries to collect these tariff duties, especially by using the military, we will secede from the Union. So we are on the brink of civil war. And lo and behold, Henry Clay comes to the rescue again. Andrew Jackson is furious. He's president. He's threatening to kill John C. Calhoun. But to Andrew Jackson's dismay, Henry Clay comes and saves the day. Hey, that rhymed. All right, so what does he do? He gets Congress to pass something called the Compromise Tariff of 1833. The tariff would be reduced 10% per year for 8 years. So this gave the northern industries a little bit of time, a little bit of wiggle room to get their prices down, but they still were protected for a couple years. And the South looked at this and said, okay, in the next 8 years, the tariffs are going to be a lot cheaper. And then to save face, Andrew Jackson has Congress pass the Force Bill, which is often dubbed the Bloody Bill. And what this says is in the future, the president could use the military to collect federal tariffs if necessary. So if we have a state that refuses to pay, the president could send in the military. And, all right, under Jackson's presidency, he would like to see the Native Americans move west, specifically to Oklahoma, past the Mississippi River. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act is passed, and this forces the Native Americans to move beyond the Mississippi River. It's not going to happen during Andrew Jackson's presidency. The Trail of Tears actually happens during Martin Van Buren's presidency, but this is the forced relocation of the Native Americans, and we have thousands of Native Americans, particularly Cherokees, die on this passage. 2 key court cases that deal with the Native Americans. The first one is the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia. Cherokee Nation is basically saying, hey, we're our own independent nation. We should be able to sue and keep our land. Goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says the Cherokee Nation are not their own independent nation and they cannot sue in court. John Marshall sympathized with the Cherokee Nation, but he said you don't have the right to sue in court. A year later, they have an American by the name of Worcester, and he sues on behalf of the Native Americans. And John Marshall in the Supreme Court says, hey, Georgia, you cannot force the Native Americans to move west. Cherokee Nation versus Georgia says Cherokees are not citizens. They're not their own independent nation. They cannot sue. Worcester says Native Americans should be protected. Please note, in Worcester versus Georgia, this says that Native Americans cannot be forced to move west. Andrew Jackson ignores this, and he allegedly says this quote, John Marshall made his decision, now let him enforce it. So he blatantly disregards the Supreme Court's decision. We have something called the Bank War. Andrew Jackson hated the bank or the bus, and he thought it was unconstitutional. 1832, 4 years before the bank charter was set to expire, Henry Clay pushes for a new one, and Andrew Jackson vetoes it. This is the first time a president uses a veto because he doesn't like something, not because he feels that it's unconstitutional. Remember, the Supreme Court declared the bus constitutional in McCulloch versus Maryland. This is another example of people saying Andrew Jackson abused his power and was acting like a king. Henry Clay and his followers dub him King Andrew I or King Andrew I, and they form a party called the Whigs. This is bad. I don't know why this is not gone yet. I apologize. We will go through this anyway. In 1833, Jackson removes all of the federal funds from the bus. And this is what buries the bank. He removes all the government funds from the bus. Nicholas Biddle, the president of the bank, calls in the loans and says to people, hey, we lent you money, now give us this money back. This creates a panic, and the bus is dead due to lack of funds. If you ever see a question about what ultimately killed the second bank under Andrew Jackson's presidency, it's because he removed all the funds. Remember, they had 4 years left on that original charter still. Andrew Jackson, when he's selling land in the West, when the government's selling land in the West, he declares something called that all lands must be purchased with gold. And we're going to see a huge shortage of gold, and this helps lead to the Panic of 1837. Couple causes. One, speculation on Western land. This means that people are buying Western land in the hopes of selling it at a higher price. Bank war was a huge cause of this, and then specie circular shortage of gold. Andrew Jackson, with all the money that he removed from the bus, he put them in something called pet banks, which were state banks in which the government deposited the funds after the death of the bus. All right, we're going to be talking about Texas now. This is not a part of the United States in this chapter or during Andrew Jackson's presidency. It will not be for many years later. But what we're going to see is a lot of Americans going to Texas, including this guy, Stephen Austin. They were encouraged to go there by Mexico to populate the areas. They were supposed to be Catholic. This shows the roots of Mexico being controlled by Spain, a very Catholic country. In 1830, Mexico emancipated their slaves, and tensions between Mexico and the U.S. increased. Slavery is illegal in Mexico. In the U.S., it is legal. In 1836, Texas says enough is enough living under you, Mexico. We're going to declare our independence. Sam Houston is named commander-in-chief. He later becomes president. This Mexican leader, you have to know him, Santa Anna, sends troops to Texas. We have the Alamo, where all Americans, everybody there fighting, is killed. Battle of San Jacinto is a very popular battle. You need to know this. Santa Anna is captured and he's forced to sign 2 treaties. Basically, both of them recognize the independence of Texas. And he says, you are now your own independent nation. And he recognizes the boundary of Texas, which will come into play with the Mexican-American War. Later, when he is no longer held captive, he said he didn't really mean to sign those treaties. He was forced to, so he refused to recognize Texas's independence. Texas wants to join America, but there's a huge battle of if Texas comes into the country, then it's going to reignite this issue of slavery. Please note that Andrew Jackson, on his last day in office, finally recognizes Texas as its own independent country, and he waited so long because of fear of slavery. Texas was not admitted because of fear of slavery at this time. Please write this down. At this time, Texas was not admitted because of fear of slavery. Very important to know. Finally, we have the election of 1840. We're skipping Martin Van Buren's presidency, and we're going to go on to a re-election in 1840, and we have William Henry Harrison, the famous general from the Battle of Tippecanoe in the War of 1812. They are running against each other. You see slogans such as Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Tyler was his vice president, which we'll talk about later. I'm really sorry about this, guys. It's kind of blurry there. But basically, this is the first time that there are slogans used in election, and there's a huge, huge, huge voter turnout. Propaganda is silly slogan set unfortunate example for future campaigns. A very famous slogan that's still used today, let's get the ball rolling, dates back to the election of 1840. First person to ask me why in class will get a piece of candy. Guys, have a wonderful day. Hope I clarified everything for chapter 13. If you have any questions, please email me, and we'll see you soon. Have a good one.